Hey Mark, how are you, man?
Doing good, John. How about yourself?
I am gearing up for Thanksgiving here, as you can tell. It's
Oh
one of
yeah.
my favorite holidays. It's all about food, food, and more food.
Yep.
So,
Food,
um,
family, and more food.
oh yeah, family, friends, and more food. And I've been posting nonstop about Thanksgiving, probably more so than real estate, but because I just love the holiday. I think Thanksgiving is a holiday that is all too often underrated and skipped. You know, everybody's from Halloween and it's right to the December holidays of Christmas,
Right.
Hanukkah, and things like that, and
Right.
not enough time around Thanksgiving. So it's my job to make sure I bring enough emphasis and focus around Thanksgiving. That's my mission.
That's
So
right. That's right. It is a time, I think, for us to slow down. I think Christmas is too, but Thanksgiving is really just a reflective time that you kind of ponder the past year, and you're appreciative for what you have and life. It's just kind of I think it's a, a reflective time, um, with friends and family and all that good, all that you have all that good food.
yeah, yeah. I agree with you, and just being thankful for everything that has occurred over the last 12 months, and like you said, be reflective. So
Yeah.
and speaking of reflective, we are now on the fifth step of purchasing a home, believe it or not, number five.
Hmm.
And this one really is geared and focused around in the fourth step, we talked about what's in that offer process. And we're assuming now at this point that the offer has been accepted. And the fifth step really in here is that time period between the offer being accepted and close. So that magical time period where it seems like everything's quiet and there's not a lot going on, and quite the contrary, right? During this fifth step, there's a lot of activity and it comes in short bursts, right?
Right.
So we'll talk about that in our session today.
It's like one of
To
your kids. It's like when your kids were little and you went to their play at school and it was a fun time. But what you didn't see was all the work that went into putting the play on, and that's kind of where we're at in this stage that we're going to talk
Yes,
about today.
yeah,
Is
I
all
agree
the
with you.
behind the scenes work.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. So, as we talk about the fifth step, one of the first things that happen in the fifth step after the offer is accepted is that the buyer, okay, whoever the buyer is, has to write that earnest money check out to the seller's broker. At least that's in Pennsylvania. It depends on what state you're in. In Maryland, sometimes it's out to the buyer broker, but your real estate agent will clarify that for you. But that has to be done within 5 business days of the contract being signed. So, it is important to get that check written and submitted. It's important also to remember that it must be for what it was specified in the agreement of sale. So if you agreed to write a earnest money check as the fiduciary binder for the contract at 2,500, and you said, well, really, I only have 1,500 to put in down toward that house right now, you are in breach of the contract. So it's important that you pay attention to the offer that's being made, and the dollar amount that's put in there for the earnest money is what is expected to be sent to the broker. Now, when the broker gets your earnest money, a lot of people think that, hey, that's money lost. No, it's not. It's money that gets back to you at closing. The broker will hold on to that money in an escrow account until closing, because that is the financial consideration that binds the contract and makes that contract executable and real. Always, when a contract, there's always financial consideration. That earnest money is that financial consideration that's activates that contract. So it's important that you get that in the specified period of time in the contract. Usually it's 5 days, 5 business days. So it's something that you have to act on right away. And your agent should tell you that as soon as you sign. Don't forget to get the EMD check dropped in the mail, or I can take that to the broker. You get a receipt of that. So that's important. You'll also get a receipt of the EMD check being delivered to the broker. And what happens is at closing, they will bring the earnest money to the table and give it to the title company. The title company, of course, deducts that from your closing costs. So again, no money lost there on the earnest money.
Right. Now, it is noteworthy, while we're on the topic of earnest money, it is noteworthy that the buyer can dictate the purpose of those funds after they're initially used as earnest money. If it's a VA loan, let's say it's a veteran who's using it in a VA scenario, they get that money back because it's 100% financing, or they can choose to apply that toward their closing costs. So buyers do have an option as to how they're going to use that money, depending on the type of purchase that it is. So they could apply that to the loan, or they could just take it back as their earnest money, and it's not needed because of the financing scenario.
Yeah, good point. Thank you for calling that out.
Yep.
Okay, so also next up is right after you get the earnest money as a buyer submitted, you want to make sure that you are looking at those inspections. So if you specified that inspections need to take place as a contingency for the offer, being completely accepted, those inspections typically will have to be scheduled and completed within 10 business days of the signing of the contract. So literally 2 weeks from the date that you signed the contract, those inspections have to be done. Reason being is that has to be completed so that the seller has a reasonable time frame to know if they have issues with the sales contract. So in other words, if let's say the foundation, there's something was found out about the foundation or the HVAC system, and the seller is unwilling to change the purchase price to take those considerations in for the failure of the inspection, that means the deal's off and they'll probably put the house back on the market. So it's important for them, speed wise, to find all that information out, find out where the buyer's head's at, with regard to that contingency. And then we need to make sure that those are completed out. So 2 rapid things right away. First, get that EMD check in. Second, get those inspections scheduled and lined up right away. And typically your real estate agent, if you don't have an inspection company lined up, your real estate agent will have a couple choices of inspection companies for you to take a look at, just in case. And usually they're very reputable. I know we're going to have a special guest coming on in, I believe, a week or so after Thanksgiving to talk a little bit about inspections with us, which I'm really excited about. But that's something also that needs to be taken care of. Now, once those 2 things are completed, then it kind of moves to, and I'm not saying it moves to, really, honestly, the mortgage company is busy at work right away too. Mark and his team, as soon as the contract's signed, as we highlighted in the 4th step, they actually get a copy of the contract the day we sign. Now, before we jump over to you, Mark, there's one other piece. The title company is then selected as well. So when we sign and the offer is accepted, the title company has to get working on researching the title as well right away, because that's right next to the mortgage. That's the long tent pole as well. There's got to be some research done on title to make sure it's clean and that it's transferable and that there's not any issues with that. So the title company is introduced to the buyer. Typically, the buyer either can select one or they can, say, hey, real estate agent, do you have one that you guys use? Most of the time, the real estate agent will have one that they can select. And if they don't, they will get one lined up that's reputable. So the title company will reach out to the buyer to get all the information needed. They need the contract as well to start their process of research on the title to get ready for the close, because typically close is going to be set up, 30, maximum 45 days from the time of signing of the offer. So not a lot of time for the title company to get started and crank it. So, but
Right.
Mark, you want to kind of highlight some of the things you have to work on as soon as, the titles or the agreement of sale signed. You're hitting the ground running too.
That's right, John. Already previous to that point, we've collected the buyer's W-2s, bank statements, copy of their driver's license, pay stubs, that sort of thing. So when we provide that pre-approval letter, we're well into the if you want to call it pre-underwritten process. In other words, not just pre-qualified this individual or individuals, but pre-approved based on what we've received. So it's already sort of well down the pipeline. The receipt of the contract now just sort of solidifies that process moving forward, because now you have this legal binding agreement that says, okay, all parties are moving forward. So really at that point, we've collected most everything. And at that juncture, I then submit or put all that documentation together in our in-house processes. I submit that formally to our processor, and it's just called a request, or a processing request, underwriting request. And then she takes all that documentation and starts to assemble it in a way that the underwriter can get it, digest it all, cross the T's, dot the I's, and then you get, in theory, a clear to close. But I'm sort of jumping the gun a little bit before you get that far. After we get the contract, the first thing that we do is order the appraisal, right? So I'll send out a credit card authorization form. So essentially, it's just a form that you authorize us to use your credit card to pay for the appraisal. Appraisals vary from $550 to $750, depending on the area and the availability of appraisers. But that's really sort of a top priority item, because appraisals kind of are I don't want to use the word weak link in the chain, but they're the longest link in the chain. They take the most time to get. So we get on those as quickly as possible and get the appraisal ordered. So
and that's really because it depends. The appraiser is pretty busy, and that it's really based on their schedule, right? It's not like the appraisal takes a very long time. It's just their schedule. When they're busy, they are busy, and it could take. I've seen some mark 2.5, 3 weeks. So we're right down to the wire waiting for the appraisal before close at times sometimes. Yeah,
exactly. You might have an appraiser that services a specific area, and there might be only 2 or 3 appraisal companies or appraisers in that area to take care of all the workload for a specific town or county. And so, those guys get booked up just like doctors do. And then you kind of get on the waiting list. So that's why that's important to get that part of it. As soon as you get the contract, get the appraisal ordered, then you're on their list. And that part of the process is underway. So, a person might say, well, so what happens after you order the appraisal and we're waiting for the appraisal, then what? So that kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. All of the information that we've collected from your client, goes to our processor, a formal request to get it underwritten or to submit it to processing, submit the loan formally to our processing team. Then they take the ball. I'm still involved, but then they run with it and get it all prepared. And by in large part, it's already prepared for the underwriter. Um, Sometimes I get a chuckle out of people will say, "Well, how long does it typically take?" When we're at that juncture, John, I mean that file can literally go to an underwriter, and it does. I guess I'm speaking from past history. That file will go right to our underwriter before we get the appraisal, and
Yeah.
that underwriter will approve the file. This is ready to go pending an appraisal. And that literally, I know this is a jaw dropper, that literally can occur 2 or 3 days after we get the contract. So
That's incredible. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It's really a fast process.
You know, one other thing you brought up to me, and that was something that our viewers should know. The appraiser does not work for the bank. The
Correct.
appraiser is independent, third party. So
Right.
they are not influenced by the real estate agent nor the bank to get the price of the home where it needs to be, right? So
Right.
the appraiser has to go to school, has to be certified by the state, has to go through rigor to get their license to appraise, and rightfully so. They have the bank's the bank's risk right there rests on the appraiser, because if the appraiser assesses it too high, in other words, they're it's worth 700,000, and the bank extends, let's say, the loan up to 660, and it's only really worth 500, the bank is really in trouble at that point. So the
Yeah.
appraiser, it's critical that the appraiser kind of gets right in the zone. And at the same time, they don't want to be too low, because they'll be blowing deals. So
Yeah.
meaning that the deal will fall apart and the bank doesn't get the work. The real estate industry suffers, and eventually the appraiser suffers, because there's no business going to the appraiser.
Right. Right.
So kind of just some information for the viewers that appraisers are independent. They are selected by the bank. Okay, so the bank knows reputable appraisers. They don't work for the bank. They're contracted out. That's a requirement. They're third party. But it's not something that the buyer can say, "Well, I know an appraiser, I want them to appraise this house." No, that's not how it works. The bank has a group of people that they go to that, again, do not work for them, but are licensed as appraisers.
Yeah. So not to make a long story too long, but back in 2008, 2009, when we did have the real estate crunch, um, Congress, through the Frank Dodd bill, kind of corrected the relationships between lending institutions, that's banks or mortgage companies, and appraisers. And they were too close. They were too cozy.
Yep.
And you could see manipulation occurring back then. So when Congress changed it through the Frank Dodd bill, we can't even talk to appraisal companies for that protection, right? Um, we actually order the appraisal through an appraisal management company. So the appraisal management company that we choose and we do loans nationwide, they're different for different states, but that appraisal management company has control over that appraisal ordering process. And so we don't touch it. We don't talk to appraisers um, for the safety of um, not wanting to breach um, those laws that are in place and ultimately it protects the consumer because
Yeah, it does.
it really does. It protects the consumer. So, um, but appraisers, they've their job is not that complex. They're just looking at, and this as a real estate agent, they're looking at comps, right? Comparable sales, and they're looking in a neighborhood or an area or a radius. So let's say that house is in a specific location. and the appraiser will look in, say, a 5-mile radius to see what homes similar to that one in square footage, number of bedrooms, bathrooms, etc., really match as close as possible to that home. And then the appraiser can sort of draw a number from the market based on recent sales. So these are not numbers that appraisers just magically come up with. They are based on the supply and demand in that specific marketplace. And so,
Agreed.
yeah.
So, so that kind of rounds out from there before we get into the closing. So the appraisal really, honestly, a lot of times, because we're almost out of time here, Mark, is really the final step before that clear to close. And the appraisal, of course, let's be clear, if the appraisal comes in higher than what the purchase price is, that's a good thing. That means that the buyer has some equity in the property going in. And as a real estate agent, that's one of the things I always try to ensure is that my buyers go in with equity in the property, because I always like knowing that if they were to turn around and sell it, they would not be underwater, so to speak. So, and even during the whole craziness of the market being a seller's market, steered all my buyers away from getting too fired up and overpaying for a house. In fact, I signaled to many of them that, hey, we're beyond what the house is worth. You're going to have to bring cash to closing to cover, because the appraiser, if it comes under, most of the time the seller will not lower the price, or didn't lower the price because the market was too hot, and they expected the buyer to bring cash to the closing to cover it, and that just means that the buyer's out of money. So just keep that in mind. And as you work with real estate agents, make sure when they do their comp analysis that you are, you have some equity walking in. That's a good feeling to have. The other part is that if it does come in under the price, and now that the market's kind of pivoting a little bit more to the buyer, the seller most likely will have to drop the price to match the appraisal amount. Otherwise, the deal will probably collapse, because the financing won't go beyond what the appraised amount is. And I believe, Mark, the appraisal sticks for what, 6 months? Whatever the house is tagged at, it's at about 6 months that it'll stay at that level.
That's a good question, John. I don't remember how long an appraisal is good. I've never encountered something that, where I needed to know longer than 30 days, but
maybe
I know they are good for quite a while.
Yeah. So that's something to keep in mind. So, so we talked about the key things. Just to summarize, once the contract's signed, earnest money check has to go right over to most of the time, the seller broker or the buyer broker, depends on what's called out in the contract. It has to be for the amount that's in the contract. Then you want to order up your inspections if you specify that you wanted the property inspected, because it's called out how fast you have to get those inspections completed. Typically, they're about 10 days after the contract signed. And title company's notified, and they start working on title research, and we'll connect up with the buyers as well. That way the buyers know, who is going to help them bring this deal together at the table. And then Mark's group gets really cranking. As you heard, a lot of the pre-qualification and pre-approval is already, typically in place. And it's the appraisal that's the long tent pole in the whole process. And we kind of talked a little bit about that. So hopefully everybody's a little bit more educated about the fifth step in the process, and really excited about moving on to the sixth. And we'll talk about closing in that sixth step. So one other thing, though, before we get to closing, is there's a final walkthrough. So that I don't want to forget that either. The final walkthrough is typically done a day or two before closing. And it's where the buyer gets to walk through to make sure there's not any egregious damage done to the home. Typically, the seller will move out or they're in the process of moving out, but it's one more inspection by the buyer with the real estate agent to make sure there's nothing crazy going on. If there is, that could stop the closing, or there has to be some remedies put in place to correct. So that's just one more thing to call out
Yep.
before we
Yep.
get to closing. So.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. All right. We're almost out of time here. Mark, thanks again for the insight and input, as always, my friend. And
Absolutely.
if I don't say this to you before we get to Thursday, you have an amazing Thanksgiving.
Well, you have a happy Thanksgiving too, John, and I want to wish all of our viewers to have a happy Thanksgiving. It's a great time of year to just relax a little bit and enjoy the holiday.
Absolutely. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.